everyone, welcome to episode number 42 of the Build Podcast, and in this week we'll go through Backbone.js, which is a client-side MVC or rather MV Star framework. Now before we dive into why should we use such a framework for client-side, let's firstly go through some of the essential websites. Firstly is backbonejs.org, which consists of the documentation regarding Backbone. Very clear. It consists of the different functions that we might be using for developing our application for the client side. The next obvious link is the GitHub repository, which contains the source code as well as the contribution if we would like to be the contributor. As you can see, this is a hugely popular framework with over 14,000 stars or even forks. So I'm really excited to be diving into this framework this week. And finally, it is this book of Backbone.js, which is by Adi Osmani. I have gone through this book, and seriously, this is so well explained in this book. So coupled with the documentation and this book, which goes through some of the fundamentals of what is a MVC, Ajax framework, and even a little bit of history, and also some of the frameworks, extensions that Backbone goes through. I highly recommend you to go through this book along with the documentation. So now let's have a little bit of discussion on why should we use such a framework. So let's take a step back away from Backbone and rather discuss on why we should use a JavaScript MVC framework. I really like the way Adi Osmani once again explained it very well. So if we are doing some kind of heavy lifting for data manipulation or putting in DOM elements into our front end or client side application, then a MVC framework might be highly needed. Let me also go through this very old blog post. It was created in 2005, but I felt this diagram was really essential. So if we have an Ajaxified application, what it does, it creates a layer in between our client side and the server side. And this layer handles the user interface changes as well as sending back the server side data that is needed. And this creates a very fast sort of UI change for our user. So in short, if we come back to a summary of why we need such a framework, I can think of basically three things. Firstly, with the use of templates in a framework such as this, it does a separation of the data and DOM manipulation. So in fact, when we remember using, let's say, a framework such as jQuery, which has the DOM manipulation and data insertion, let's say in terms of string concatenation, this kind of framework allows us to separate them in a neat way. Secondly, I can also think of having the entire application as asynchronous and having a single page application, which also allows us to load the scripts asynchronously, as also allow a fast UI change, which is almost immediate to any user using it. And thirdly, and most importantly for us as developers, is the structure of the code. This definitely allows us to make the application more scalable and maintainable in a team of developers. So I'm really excited to be diving into an MVC framework, and I thought of starting with Backbone.js because it is sort of a minimalist framework that allows us to have lots of configurations and flexibility, and at the same time it is also very minimal. So let's get started with Backbone.js for this week. For this week, I have taken inspiration once again from Adi Osmani's book, and this week we are going to create a very tiny only client-side application on computing books that we should read. So for example, if we create a title example and then author, and then we add it, it gets added to the DOM notice. No refresh of the page whatsoever. And we can do also a very quick elimination. But of course, because this is client side, it is upon refresh, it will go back to the default values. But nevertheless, I hope it will give us a tiny bit of hint into what MVC framework can do. So let's get started by building this little project. So here I am in my command line in a brand new folder, which is completely empty as of now. And here I'm going to create a file called index.html. And let's open this up in Sublime Text. So there you go. And here I will create a very basic structure, and let's just call it my reading list. And inside the body, I will create a script tag. And over here, let me create a very simple class that we are used to doing in JavaScript. So for this, I'm going to have a var read. And then inside function, let me just pass in some configurations. And let's say this one has this dot title, which equals to config dot title, and it also has this dot author, and this will be config dot author. Very simple. And of course, as usually, if we want to attach a function to this sort of class, we usually attach it to the prototype. So for us, we will do read.prototype, and let's say we will just have it as display, which is a very simple function, and I'll just return, say, this dot title, let's say by, and then this dot author. So let's open this up in the browser and the browser console, and let's see what we can do with it. So the very first thing we will do is var read, and let's create a new read object. So notice here read is obviously available, and let's create some data inside it. So we will do title, and let's just say the title is code complete, and we'll also pass in an author, Steve McConnell. Right, so once that's done, if you do read.title, there you go, it's already coming up in the prompts and it will give us the answer, it's code complete. Similarly, if you do read.author, which is also coming up as a prompt, we will have Steve McConnell. And of course, we can also do the function, which is display, and let's see what it gives us. Yep, exactly as we coded. Now, if we are creating a huge client-side application, this sort of code will get really messy in a short period of time. Imagine, again, coupling with jQuery or other sort of libraries, and this will become unmaintainable in a very short period of time. So let's see how Backbone.js will help us do this. So I'm going to remove all this code from here, and firstly let me add in some of the dependencies for Backbone. Now for some really easy DOM manipulation purpose, I will include the jQuery from CDN. Backbone does not have a dependency on jQuery. Backbone has only one dependency, and that is the underscore library. So there you go, underscore from cdn.js. And it also has the Backbone library itself. So looks like we already have the 3 essential libraries that we need to build our full client-side application. So let me just add in the HTTP because I'm just gonna use the static file. So let me just include the HTTP colon here, and I'm gonna open this up in the browser, or rather refresh this. So just to make sure that jQuery is available, I'm just gonna query the $sign. Yep, it is. I will also query underscore, which is the dependency for Backbone, and yep, it's available. And finally, it's Backbone. As you can see, it is available in the autocomplete. So I'm gonna tab, and looks good. We are all started to play with Backbone. In Backbone, in order to create a class like the read that we previously created, we will create a model. So firstly, I will come back to my command line and I'll create a little bit of folder structure. The first folder that I'll create is obviously called JS, and inside here I will have the entire client-side JavaScript code in terms of Backbone. So let me just get inside the JS folder, and over here I will create 3 directories. The first one will be collections, which we will code in later. The next one will be models, and the last one will be views. So that looks good, and inside the models I'm going to create in one file. So that file will be called read.js, and this is the first file that we will code. So there you go, my model has read.js. So let me open up read.js, and the first thing I'm going to do is kind of namespace it. So everything that I'm going to create will have app dot and then the function name, so that we don't have any namespace collision in the global space. So I will create app if it's already available, if not, create a new object. Alright, so how do we create a very simple class-like structure in Backbone? So I'm going to say app.read, and I'm using the Backbone.js snippets, so I'm going to create a Backbone model, and inside here I'm going to create a simple defaults function. So I'm going to create defaults, and inside here, just like before, I'm going to have title, And by default, I'm going to give it no title. And next, I'm also going to have author, and by default, it's going to be unknown. This looks pretty similar to what we created with plain JavaScript previously. And finally, to make this available, we will go to index.html, and I'm going to make it as part of a script source. So that will be js/models/read.js. So looks like we are good to go, and I'm going to come back to the browser and refresh it. And now when I come and say var read equals to new app.read, there you go, it's coming up in the prompt. And now I can set some information. So I'm going to put in something. So let's say the title is Mythical Man Month and the author is Frederick Brooks. And now how do we access it? We can do it via read.get and then title. There you go, it's a Mythical Man Month, and we can also do the same for author, and it's Frederick Brooks. Now let's create a new one this time. So let's say read to, and let's say new app.read. Nothing much. Now let's try to get the value for read2. So instead of getting read.get, I'm going to say read2.get. Now notice here what happens. It will give us unknown, and if we give the same query, but this time for title, it will give us no title. Now notice these two values are exactly the same as what we defined in the defaults. And when we go back to the Backbone.js documentation, in models, you will see that default is one of the functions I'm using right here. So I hope with just backbone.model.extend, it has kind of showed you how easy it is to create what we previously created with plain vanilla syntax. But let's add on some more power for a Backbone. And the next one I'm going to use is, let's say, some validation properties. So let's say you want to set the title, and obviously it doesn't want to be empty. How do we check for that? So once again, we come back to the documentation, and here there is another function called validate. So let's try that out. So I'm going to put a comma and create a new function called validate function, and I'm going to pass in the attributes and options and a very simple check. So if the attributes is empty, then it will kind of tell you, hey, the title of the book can't be blank. Let's try this out in the browser. So this time I'm going to set the same information, but let me set it this time. So I'm going to set a title, which will be an empty string, but we will also have to pass in a option to say that, hey, the validation is true. And notice that it is false. So when we go to read2.get and we get title, it will actually fall back to the default value. So once again, let's just try to set it. It's false, and when we try to get it, it will fall back to the default value. A very neat way to ensure validation. Finally, we will try out the constructor or the initialization function. We can invoke this function whenever a new model is created. So to do that, I'm going to do initialize and then function. And let's just say for the ease of it, I'm going to do a console log. And I'm just going to say, hey, a new book to read is added. So let's try it out in the browser. So once again, I'll just say read equals to a certain value. And there you go, it will give us console.log statement right away. Now let's say apart from this simple console.log statement, you want to detect a certain change, let's say in the title, and want to do certain thing to it. So for this, we also have the onChange property. So let's try that out. So we'll say this dot on, and then we will say, let's say change and then title function, and we will pass in the newly created or changed model. And inside here, I will just get the title, which will actually be model.get. Let's say we will do a console.log, happy reading, the book title, and then a little exclamation mark. Oops, I should change, or rather finish the bracket right here. All right, so I have a new model right now, and let's try to change it. And this time I'm just gonna say it's a version 2 of the book. So let's set the title and see what happens. Oops, it should be read. And there you go, happy reading Mythical Man Month version 2. So that was a little bit about how you can set defaults, validate, initialize, and you can also create your own function. So for example, previously we had a display function, so let's do that. And we will have a simple return this.get title plus by this.get author. So once again, refresh, read, and if you do read.display, And there you go, you have the book name by the author. Now I have showed only the validate, initialize your own function as well as the defaults. In Backbone model, be sure to check out many other functions that will enable us to create models and interact with it. So after the models here, we will go ahead and explore some of the other components of Backbone.js, for example, the collections and the views. But before we do that, I'm going to create a new file inside the project under the JS folder and call it app.js. Here I will basically initialize all the data that I keep doing. So for example, I will create two new models, which is read1 and read2, along with the title and the author names. And of course, I will also need to come back to the index.html and make sure I add in the file, which is js/app.js. So looks good, we are good to go, and next we will explore one of the main components of Backbone, which is the view component. So now that our model is created, which is the read model, we will go ahead and create a view for it. So under the views folder, I'll create read.js, and inside here I will create the familiar app name for some name spacing, and then I'll do app.readView, which equals to Backbone view extend. Now let's query the view in our browser console. So here I will create a new view. So I'll call it var and then read view equals to new app.read view. Well, it's not available because obviously I also have to include this file in my index.html, which I obviously forgot, so let me include that. Views and then read.js. And now you see read view is available. Next, let's query the read view. So I'm going to do read view and then .l, and here you will see that by default it is actually wrapping the entire view within this div element. The interesting thing about Backbone is that we can also wrap this around jQuery with a $sign, and when we do that, all the jQuery functions are also available. Let's just say, for the sake of demo, add class. And let's say by default we saw that it is actually a div element. So if we want to change this to say a tag name to li, which is a list item, create the new read view once again. And this time when I query the .el object, you see that it is actually an li. Similarly, you can also target, let's say, a class name. So I'm just gonna call it class read class just for the sake of demo. And you can also give it an ID. And let's say just for the sake of demo, I'm just gonna say read ID. So come back to the browser console. And when I query this once again, there you go. It is tag li with the ID and the class. And just as we showed before, with jQuery we can also, let's say, remove class, and there you go, the class is removed. Now let me just delete this away. We'll just work with the list item. Now wouldn't it be great if inside this element tag we can actually input some information which is specific to the initiated model? So to do that, we actually create this template, and we're going to say _.template. The _.template obviously comes from the underscore library, and inside here we can actually refer to our model information. So to do that, we can actually embed it inside these little greater than and lesser than percentage signs, and then we say title by, and we give it the author name. And after we do the template, we also need to render the template. So for that we have the render function, and we're going to do this.l object.html, which is basically a jQuery, and we're going to say this.template, and we will say this.model.toJSON. And finally, rendering is not enough. We need to invoke the rendering immediately upon initialization. So I'm gonna do the initialize function here, and we will say this.render. I have missed a little comma here. And let's create the view once again, and inside here we will pass in the model. So as we have already initialized some of the models here, we have read1 and read2. So just for the sake of demo, let's just take read1. And now when we do read view.l, And there you go. Inside the list item, we actually have the information. Now, although this is pretty cool, if you want to have a little bit more structure in terms of what we want to implement in the DOM, this is probably not the best way to deal with it, because we are mixing the data and the DOM together. So to separate them neatly, firstly we will go ahead and create the structure, the same one inside index.html. So inside index.html, above all the libraries that we loaded, I'm gonna do script, and this one will have a special type which will be text/template, because eventually we will be defining the template. And inside here we will also give it a special ID, which let's just say it's a read view. And inside here we will pass in the data, which is exactly this one. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. I'm going to cut it away from here and paste it right here. And notice here the ID is read view. So now when we go back to view, all we need to do is pass in the jQuery object, which for us is read view, and then .html, and that's it. So it's pretty neat. So basically it's telling us to refer to the read view and insert it right there. So I'm going to refresh it and try it out once again. So there you go. The new read view is created with a model which is read1. And now when I do read view.l, a new list item is created. And all I can do now is just do document.body.append read view.l. And there you go, it's right there in our browser. So that was a little bit of the view, and of course there are many other functions that we can play with it that Backbone originally offers. The next section of Backbone that we will explore is this thing called collections. Collection is basically a group or an ordered set of models. Now, as we realize that we have been creating individual models, but it is probably not efficient if we keep initiating models and then adding them in a group. So for this, Backbone.js comes with this concept called collections. So here, let's create a new file and we'll give it a plural name, reads.js. So just like before, I will create a new variable called app.reads equals to Backbone collection extend. And over here, the very first thing we need to do is define what is the model name. So for us, it will be app.read. And of course, before we forget, we need to include this file in index.html itself. Collections and reads.js. And I will also initiate a little bit of the collection. So let me just create a var and I'll call it reads. And this will be new app.reads. And inside here, I'll pass in two models, which is read1 and read2, just so that we don't have to keep typing this in our console log. And now we can actually refer to the reads variable, there you go, which is already initialized. And here you see that length is 2. So let's have a look at it. There you go, the length is 2, and inside that we have two models. Why don't we go ahead and query it? So once again, reads.length is a function that is available to us. And if we go, there you go, it's 2. The other interesting one is reads.toJSON, which will come in really handy for us to manipulate data. And there you go, it will return us in terms of 2 objects. Now inside the collections, there are once again many functions that we can use. One of them that I'm going to use right now is the initialize function, which is typically the very same function as what we used in the model. So let me now go ahead and do initialize and then function. Of course, we can add in some console log statements, but let's also do the on change function. So we will do this.on, and this time we will add in. So let's say you add in a model, it will do function and then it will take in the model, and then let's say it will be very similar. It will get the title, which is model.getTitle, and then it will do a little console log statement, which is new book is added to the reading list. And then maybe we will just echo out the title. And just for curiosity, we can also say the reading list size. And this one we can do this.length as we just explored in the browser. We are going to do reads.add. And typically, like before, you can add in a title. So let's say, and then author, a developer. And there you go. The collection size right now is 3. new book is added to the reading list. Now let's try to remove as much as we learned how to add it. So I'm just going to add in one more function so that this dot on remove, it will also have a little console log state. But this time, instead of new book added to the reading list, I will say book is removed from the reading list. And then I'll just echo out the title. Now I'll just also say the reading list size is now this dot length. So let's try this out. I'm going to say reads dot remove, and this time I will just pass in the read to data. So there you go. Right now the collection size will be 1, and let's just add in reads to, and there you go, the size is back to 2. So I hope this has given us a little bit view about what collections can do. It can take in models, it can add and remove, initialize, and most importantly refer to the model that we want to define it as. Now so far in our application we have been creating a view, but we have been creating for each of the list items, and the model information is inserted each of the list item. Wouldn't it be nice if we can have the entire collection inside the view? So to do that, we will create a new file inside the views folder, and we'll call it reads.js. And of course, as anything, we will also include this file inside the script tag. And before we do anything, I will come to the body and create a new div element so that all the reads collection is inserted right here. Next, let me go back to the reads view, which is the collection view function. And the very first thing I will do is, of course, create the app variable. And next I will do read app.reads view, which is the plural, and it will also be a backbone view. Now the very first thing we can do is create the element, which is reads in our case. So I'm going to go back to the collection view and create EL and pass the ID of reads. Next, I'm going to create an initialize function, and inside here I will say this dot collection equals to new app.reads, which is the entire collection, and I'm just going to take in the initial reads list. Next, I will listen to for the changes. So there is a function called listen to, and I will listen to this dot the entire collection, and whenever it is an add function, like a model is added to the collection, render read function. Great. Now this initialize function is not enough. The next one that we have to do is the render function itself, and the render function for the entire collection will basically loop through each of the models. So to do that, we'll do this dot collection dot each, and here we will pass in the function with an item, and we'll do this dot render read, and we will pass in the item. Now notice here it will also call in the render read, which is each of the models. So let's create that function. So render read, and we will pass in the item, which is the model in our case, and var read view, which will equal to new app.read view. And inside here the model is defined as the function parameter. And finally we will do this dot jQuery element and append read view dot render dot element. And yes, I need to pass this as the argument of the function. Great. And finally, just so that we don't have to deal with the initialization, I will just cut and paste in. Firstly, I will cut and paste in the collection, which is basically an array of objects with the title and the author passed in. There are 4 books, and I will also initialize the collection view. And I realized I forgot to return render. So inside the read model view, I have to return this inside the render function. And inside the read collection view, I also have to call the render function, which will call the render of the collection view. And refresh the browser. There you go. It is now attaching to the DOM. And of course, this information is coming directly from app.js, where we initialized all the collections. Great. So now that we have the initial information being displayed, the next thing we will do is sort of have a little add button. So to do that, we will create a little form first. So the first thing I'll do is come back to index.html and open up the reads div and create a little form so that we can input the data, and later on the collections view can take this information and add it to the DOM immediately. Alright, very simple. So let's look at the browser how it looks like. And there you go, a very simple form, but obviously if we add in something inside here, nothing will happen. Now notice that we will be adding it to the collection view right here. So let's go back to our Sublime Text and we will add it to the collection view. So let's come back right at the bottom. The very first thing we will do is the events, and that event is called click, and it is clicking the add button, which is of course has a add ID, and it will call a function called add read, which we will define the next thing. So add read. First thing it will do is prevent the default function. The next thing it will do is create a form data, and it will basically catch in all the data as an object, and then we will later pass this on to the model. And finally, let's just query the form element, which is add read, and then it will go to each of the children, and finally we will add this to the collection, and here we will simply pass in the form data object. Sorry, I made a little spelling mistake right here, and of course I have to pass in the function argument as well. And let's try it, and there you go, it's being added. So let me, for the sake of just trying, I'll just add in a random value, and there you go, it's being added. And the last thing we will do is remove each of this model. Now notice here, because it will be each of the model, now we will go into the model view. So we will go into the view and we'll go into the singular, so read view. So over here we will add in the same thing, one event, and then accordingly a custom function. Now before we even do that, let's come back to the template where we defined the title and the author, and after this we will create a button, and this will also have an ID of, let's say, done. We are done reading, and the text will be done. And let's close the button. And here we will do exactly the same as the collections view. So I'm going to come back here and declare events, and it will be really similar. It will be click and the ID is done. I'm going to create a new function and call it done reading, and this will just do this.model.destroy, and finally this.remove. And now when I click each of the done, it should make the elements go away. And at the same time, if you want to add in something, it's being added as well, complete with the done button. Alright, so that's a little bit about Backbone.js in introduction. Now before I end, I wanted to point out some of the improvements that we need to do, and I could think of 4 of them. Finally, there is this website called todomvc.com, which basically takes in all sorts of frameworks and builds the same application, which is a to-do list application, using all of them so that we can sort of compare and see how each of them works, not in terms of the code structure, but also maybe in terms of performance, so that it gives us a little bit of headway into us deciding which framework we want to use eventually. And finally, for the build link of the episode, it goes to sidebar.io. This basically gives us daily just one link, which is curated, I believe, by Sasha Grief. And whether you want to do it by RSS or Facebook or Twitter, do follow them, and every day you just get this one single list. I really find this very helpful and handy. So that's it for this week's episode of Build Podcast. For all other episodes, go ahead and check out build-podcast.com and subscribe through any of your 5 favorite channels, which are RSS, GitHub, iTunes, YouTube, or Vimeo. And I'll see you next week. Goodbye.